So much for joining today. We are so proud to be presenting to you this fireside chat with Dale Dougherty himself. We will be speaking about the future of the Maker movement, and it's such an honor to have Dale because he is truly the father of the Maker movement. He is the founder of Make Magazine and the creator of Maker Faire, and we are going to have a conversation, especially as Project Invent, being able to speak about why we do this work as well. We're so passionate about empowering students as makers and seeing that they can make a change in the world. And Dale is the best person to be speaking to about that. So we're actually gonna remove the share screen so you can see us up close and personal as we get started. So Dale, why don't you go ahead and speak to us a little bit about why you were motivated to get involved in the Maker movement in the first place?
Well, it does go back a few years. It really originated in the idea of just seeing people doing things and observing people and thinking, well, we don't actually have a name for that. We don't have a way to think about it. And I, came up with the idea for Make Magazine, and I was initially just interested in the idea that we can all use technology in different ways, personal ways, not just buying it, but actually mixing it together in different ways and creating new things. And so I kind of wanted to do a cooking magazine, for technology people.
Also a type of making, cooking.
Right, exactly. But recipes are really important. That's how you learn to do things. And I thought all the things in a lot of science and technology are sort of describing the thing, but they don't actually explain how the thing works or how you might do it yourself. And so I wanted to take do-it-yourself ideas from like woodworking and cooking and add, just sort of new technologies to it, with the idea that this was accessible to potentially anyone. And that was my point of departure. I thought it was visual, it was interesting. And I think partly is the more I began to talk about making, the more people say, oh, well, you should know this person, or you should know what I do. And so it really became a journey of itself to just talk to people about what they were making and learn what they knew how to do.
Well, we're honored that you heard for Project Invent us saying, hey, look at what we're doing for the Maker movement, and you were interested enough to play a part in helping us share more about the movement itself as well.
Yeah, thank you.
Tell me more about, so I love this idea of democratizing making so everyone has the power to be able to create. Why do you think it's so important that young people especially start when they're still in school?
I have a fun answer to that, and maybe a deeper one later, but because they want to.
Very
right?
True.
And my point of origin for this, especially really the education, was, we were doing Maker Fairs, and we wanted to attract families, and we got lots of kids there. And I thought their eyes just sort of opened wide, like, wow, there are people that do these kind of things. And I began to worry almost immediately is, well, how are they going to learn how to do these things? And how could we make it possible for more people to acquire the skills and the mindset of doing this? Something I wanted to mention earlier when I was talking the intro, what I'm kind of interested in is know-how, right? Not knowledge per se. I'm interested in the practice almost more than the theory. And it seems like our school systems are so oriented towards theory because it's kind of efficient to teach theory, and practice is a little bit messy. And but when you use your hands and you do things, you really fundamentally learn how to do things. And I think that know-how has kind of been missing a lot as we become more comfortable, I guess this might be a bad word, as consumers. We just buy stuff, and it almost is sold to us because it's easy.
Mhm.
And I think one of the virtues of making is that it's hard. And one of the examples I used in my book years ago was marathoning. There's more people today that have run marathons than ever in history, and it's not gotten any easier, right? I mean, yeah,
Yeah.
you might have better tennis shoes or sneakers than you had then, but it's still 26 and some part of another mile to run a marathon. But it means something to people because it's hard, and
Mhm.
people aren't running in marathons to be professional runners and win prizes. They really run for personal reasons to accomplish that goal, to prove to themselves they can do that. And I sort of caught up in initially, it's like, why do we make things? It's not necessarily going to be cheaper or easier, but it's really satisfying when you make something.
Right. And I feel like sometimes as teachers or within school systems, we try to protect students from challenge or we don't
Yeah.
reward failure. And a lot of the times, if you're tackling anything challenging, you have to accept that some failure will come along the way. I think one example of that, and I would love to hear kind of your thoughts on how you've seen making take a role in COVID-19 and with the pandemic, how different people have stepped up for being able to take this challenge that we've been faced it with and then make something fulfilling and impactful through it. For Project Invent, everything we teach is about invention for social good. How do we
Yeah.
channel students to see that they can impact problems around them by noticing the problems and being empowered with the making skills to create
Hmm.
solutions? What have you
Hmm.
already seen happen in the maker world with
Well,
young people rising up?
almost a year ago, I started paying attention to what was going on, and I started writing about it on our website, and I called it Plan C. And what I kind of meant by that was, well, here's a crisis, and you'd think government's going to step up and help us, and
Mhm.
that's kind of Plan A, and that wasn't working. And you think maybe next in line is industry, and they're going to figure out how to do this, but I didn't see that really satisfying it, and so it kind of fell to, a civic response was needed. Citizens needed to get together and figure out how to do this. And by virtue of us having maker spaces and people trained as makers over really the last 15 years,
Mhm.
uh, these are people that had a can-do attitude, like if there's a problem, I could solve it. And so they initially thought the problem was ventilators. And a lot of people said, oh, well, can we make an open source ventilator? But then what emerged was there was a greater need for personal protective equipment, or PPE, to use the jargon. And makers realized we could make them. And so it's almost a textbook example, to use the term, of what makers and what maker community can do. A few people created designs. Those are digital files. They could be distributed around the world and shared and modified and improved. And in each community, you have a maker space or someone with a 3D printer who could actually begin making the PPE. But that even wasn't enough. You needed another group of people who made the connections out into the community, that talked to doctors and nurses and
It's very
hospitals and said,
interdisciplinary.
what do you
Finding,
need? Yes.
yeah.
So, it was really interesting how we found people and groups forming together, like in Chicago. Uh, at DePaul University, they shut down the makerspace because it was under lockdown. And they said they wrote a piece said that we liberated the 3D printers. they took them home, and they began creating a network of people with printers who could print, say, the main components of a face shield. And but you began seeing not just people we think traditionally as makers. We just saw a doctor in Montana that he's a neurosurgeon, and his hospital told him that he would have to begin reusing his masks. And he says,
Mm.
I wear a different mask for each surgery, not a mask for multiple days. And so he said there had to be a different way to do that. And he talked to a friend who was a dentist who had used 3D printing in dentistry, who had a son that went to school and studied design. And the three of them began to create what later became called the Montana mask.
Mm.
And They really shared that design openly. It got propagated, but it really took off because a woman who had really probably, in my view, no technical experience, but she was the community person, the builder of community. And she was a military spouse of a physician. And she said, I'm going to help these Montana mask people, and I'm going to make sure that people know about it and know how to make it and use it. So those are the kind of stories. But we saw it not just here in America, but around the world. And for a particular point in time, it was filling a gap because supply chains were broken. Hospitals that are, they're just like us. They go on Amazon and order a bunch of things and are expect to get them the next day or two, but they couldn't get them and they didn't have an answer to that. So, makers began calling hospitals, say, hey, we have some of these, do you want them? And probably in a normal course of things, they would say no, but they had no other alternative. I mean, the CDC was saying, we're in crisis mode, use anything you can as a mask. So it really was. And you asked me earlier, there were young people doing this, high school students, college students who had been exposed to 3D printing. And it wasn't just 3D printers, there were laser cutters and there were people creating hospital gowns, which is largely sewing. But I was really impressed and inspired by how people just figured out what the need was. And it moved from initially healthcare professionals to other essential workers, like bus drivers and other people that didn't have access to the protective equipment to be able to do their job.
I love how the maker movement is about giving people agency of you don't need to wait around until someone else solves the problem for you.
Yeah.
You can solve the problem right now. And I think another point you touched on was about how one woman was a community connector and one guy was 3D printing. And when you look at the maker movement and how you make impact, it always involves people of different talents and different skills to come together to make that impact happen. And I think that's something that we always have to remind young people as well. If they don't resonate with the engineering side of invention and making, helping them realize it's an incredibly interdisciplinary thing to be able to make it.
Right. I think that's one of the biggest points about the maker movement, that
everyone can be part of it. Exactly.
Yes, and also that the more disciplines you mix together, the better. And it's almost I was writing something today. It's not to devalue expertise, but I kind of phrase it this way: if you're a young person and you think you're an artist, taking art history isn't going to necessarily make you an artist, right? Actually, picking up a pencil and drawing, and doing that over and over, you start to do these things without having all the knowledge in the world. In fact, that might cripple you. And I think making is like that. Yes, you could go be an engineer and have that, but there are engineers who can't make things, right? Because they've just learned from textbooks.
Right, they don't have
that theory
know-how.
side. Right, they don't have that know-how. And so it's really interesting to encourage people just to try something and start doing things. And I always say that this is the benefit of hobbies and the things that you do for yourself. As soon as you start doing something, you begin to talk about it. And the more you talk about it, the more you meet other people that are interested in that. And you don't realize it at the time, but you're building a network of people around what you like to do. And I call it, these are created networks as opposed to networks, like where you grew up or what school you went to. These are networks that you forge out of your interests. And I think it's very powerful.
I think one thing we see with our Project Invent students all the time is a student's never going to go around and share with everyone like how cool their homework was. But when they created an invention that never existed before, they want to go around and share, man, did you, like, I had a meeting with Jose yesterday. I learned about how he used his wheelchair. I learned about how he opens doors, even though he can't have the mobility to use his hands or arms. And I built this thing that can help him be able to I don't know, play card games or be able to
Right,
access
right,
the internet in a way that he couldn't before. Those are things that are worth
right.
sharing,
And well,
including movement
also,
versus,
yeah,
did you finish your
and
worksheet?
I think many people don't get the opportunity to talk to who might be a user of something that you create. But
Yeah.
to go back to the COVID examples, again, some of these designs were established and moved around. But when people, when the makers or their groups took a product to the hospital, and a doctor or nurse or someone tried it on, they had feedback. And often they say,
Mhm.
"Oh, that's what it's not comfortable for you," and so often, and what was interesting is the doctors and nurses often had no ability in the past to give comments on things that the hospital purchased,
Yeah,
right? It's kind of a one size fits all. But in the maker versions of these, they
yeah.
they could get them customized
Right, because the
and
creator can build a relationship with the
right,
actual user.
and they can listen, right? And they say, well,
Mhm.
that's not covered. We can adjust that.
Right.
And the other thing that came out too is that because they began, like the Montana mask was, it's basically a mold that you put the filter paper and the filter material inside of, and so you had the mold was the same each time you sterilized it, but
Mhm.
the paper or filter changed. People began to decorate it, and it was
Oh,
theirs instead of this is just something that's disposable and I'm going to throw away.
yeah, it becomes personalized. I also want to remind for any attendees, there's a Q&A feature. If you hover on the black bar on the bottom, you can drop in any questions you have for Dale as well. We want this to be an open forum for you to all get your questions answered. As you come up with questions, I do want to ask Dale one thing that I feel like has been a bit of a recurring theme here of diversity in making and interdisciplinary nature of making. What is the role of diversity in making and why is it important?
Yeah. Well, there's obviously lots of different dimensions or perspectives on diversity. Uh, and I think in some ways, the future of the maker movement is it'll be recognized for its diversity. Um, I don't think it necessarily started there in terms of the people that I found at the beginning. But I'm so impressed today when I'm especially around young people and
Mhm.
when I see who's talking about being a maker. It's increasingly a lot more women and a lot
Yeah,
more people who have been underrepresented in the past. Are we there yet? No, but I think we are, and that's just why education is so important because I like to think in the past that people were introduced to making because a parent did it, and showed
mhm,
them a workshop in the garage, or maybe they had a shop teacher who did that. But if you didn't get that kind of access, you would never know about these things.
yeah,
And so you would not know if you were good at. And that kind of something I've talked to you a bit about is I think there's a real parallel here to athletics. If we did not have ball fields and sports leagues and coaching, would a kid ever know
mhm,
if they had athletic ability? Because they never tried it,
right,
right? And today, I remember someone in Atlanta telling me it's like you can't grow up and be male and a kid in Atlanta and not play football. I mean, everybody has that opportunity, right?
yeah,
Now, whether that's good or bad is another question. But I do think some of our goals should be as a community. How do we get everybody the opportunity to find
mhm,
out if this is something that they can do, and even if I'm not really that interested in making the world into everybody's an engineer or everybody's one thing or another, but I believe the more things you're exposed to, especially as young, they're immensely valuable to you down the road.
mhm,
That just as literature is, or learning another language is, but having the ability, it maybe gives me an opportunity. I think making is simply the ability to turn an idea into something real or useful, right? And something that actually, you have an idea in your head and you want to tell someone about it, but
yeah,
rather than words, you actually want to create that instance, that object that says, this is what I've been thinking about. That
Mhm.
object's going to change and become a prototype, and maybe one day become a product or a piece of art. But being able to share that and almost get it out of your head into the world is magical. And I
Yeah.
want more kids to have that opportunity. And I want more educators to be, back to my sports analogy, kind of good
Mhm.
coaches that can help kids take an idea and work on it
And
and
experience that
develop it.
magic. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
The thing I love the most about the maker movement and the sports analogy is that essentially all of this infrastructure had to be built in order for sports to be such a powerful force.
Exactly.
And so much learning to come from it, of not just
Yeah.
how to play the sport, that's one piece of it, but more importantly, the teamwork and the sportsmanship that comes from engaging in that type of thing. For making, it's the same. You do learn some cool skills like 3D printing or laser cutting, but at the end of the day, it's the resilience and the creativity and being able to have empathy for other that are the skills that we actually want them to take away from it.
Yes.
And that infrastructure of the maker
And
teachers, the maker spaces all have to be
right.
built for that opportunity to exist.
Yeah. And I think one of the things that's really important to me personally, and I was talking to a teacher at a school in Albuquerque yesterday that runs kind of a school for kids that um, uh, yeah, have been in, delinquent, in some
Mhm.
form, and they can't return back to normal school. And you know, those kids feel so defeated by the school system. They feel like they're not good learners, and they've largely failed. They think of themselves as failures because they failed on tests.
Yeah,
And when you can give them a different experience where they begin to develop some competencies and they begin to see what they can do, it changes their whole worldview.
definitely.
And I think there's so many kids, especially at the high school level, that. So, and I think this should apply to Project Invent. Too many extracurricular and additional programs are sort of aimed at that kid that's going to you know, the best school and they're the brightest kid. They're labeled as such. But I'm really interested in the kid that's none of that,
Yeah,
right? The kid that says, I just, I I'm not very satisfied in school. I need a different way to demonstrate what I
yeah.
can do, and a different way of learning and doing can make a big difference in their lives.
Definitely. I want to be able to move to some of the lots of questions we have from the
Yeah,
audience
great.
as well. We have about 10-ish minutes to be able to cover some of these. So I'll start with
Yeah.
the first one that came in. Do you have any recommendations for the best tools for making for a middle school audience, such as any projects you love that you've seen?
Well, let me frame it this way. I focus on materials more than tools. And cardboard can be a incredible construction tool. So uh, you know, hand tools, especially in the middle school, hand tools, um, scissors, and those kinds
Mhm.
of
It
things.
can be very low
Um,
tech and low cost, essentially.
yeah, low tech, low cost. If you want to go into something that's more tech, I would say the sort of the microcontrollers like Microbit and others are, compact, affordable. You can do a lot of things with them. That you balance two things here. One is that sometimes uh, kids' imagination can transform ordinary things into magical things, right? But
Mhm.
sometimes ordinary things don't stimulate their imagination. Whereas if you put a kid in front of a microbit, they might say, "Oh, that's cool. I could build this or that out of it." Fine. So you have to kind of think both ways.
Yeah,
But it's just like you can make music with your voice and your hands, right? You don't need, a Stradivarius violin. So, the
exactly.
same way we can make things within constraints and within limits, and often we learn a lot from that. So um, that's why I think in terms of makerspace, I always thought the workspace is the most
Mhm.
important, like the workbench,
Yeah.
having places that don't look like desks and often where kids are standing and moving around, that is how it will free them up to make and to think about doing things. 3D printers, fine. If you can get them, great. But that's not what this is about. It's
Yeah.
actually the process of taking those ideas. And even if, one of the things you could do at middle school is teach drawing, not as art, but as, hey, you've got an idea in your head. It might be a skateboard that could go to the moon. That's usually what middle school kids want. But get them to draw. I see someone, Danielle Martin. Hi, Danielle. Good to see you. Measurement. There's so many things. Cooking is a great way also to teach measurements, and to get them to also teach them to use the resources that are online. Earlier, when you said the democratization of technology, I think that's half the story of the maker movement. The other half is what you might call the democratization of learning, that there are more ways to learn how to do these things, and they're more accessible to more people.
Right.
So you could have all this complex technology, but if people don't know how to use it, it really doesn't have any value. But the fact that you can go to YouTube or you can find one thing or another is really, I think, accelerated the movement in our communities.
Yeah, I think that skill of learning how to learn is one of the most important transferable skills
Absolutely.
that comes out of making anyway.
And that's an important role for a coach or a leader, a teacher. To I always thought our one of the best coaches are librarians because they
Shout
don't
out
give
to
you
librarians
answers,
if we have any here.
right? But they help you. They help you find the answer by pointing you in some directions. The worst thing I think you can do for a kid is give them the answer. I think you can do things like recognize that they're frustrated, that it may not be working the way they want, but encourage them to explore different ways to find the answer themselves.
Yeah. Let's try to get through 2 or 3 more questions before we have to wrap up. So we have one very relevant one. Can you talk about the relationship between making and invention?
Well, all right. This is I'll try not to get too much on the soapbox. I was actually this last year I read Matt Ridley's book on how innovation works, and he distinguishes between innovation and invention, and they kind of might relate. I think he would describe an innovation as when something actually gets used, right? When lots of people adopt it, and as opposed to someone solved a problem, but nobody seemed to figure out that solution was worthwhile, and it never went anywhere. But I think making and invention certainly overlap, but I felt oftentimes that there were so many preconceptions about what an inventor was. It was more, they were more eccentric, and what attracted to me about making was that I could portray it as ordinary, as something that you already do it, you just don't know it, right? Rather than saying, but it's also true that there's maybe a practice around invention, if that's your goal, that you can learn from other people who do that. Now, the other thing I'll add is that I think the maker movement did inventors a big favor by saying there's an alternative here in which you could share your ideas using open source hardware and other things that, your goal doesn't necessarily have to be to commercialize your invention. You can apply, if one of your goals is that your project, say, gets widely used, sharing it openly makes that happen. And you could be well known as the person who created that project. When you want to commercialize it, and I've run into a lot of frustrated, inventors over the years that say, well, I just can't find a company that wants to take on my idea. And I've seen also in the maker community people that shared that idea, and some turned out to be not very good ideas, and they didn't go anywhere, even for that purpose. But others found, hey, this is a good idea. I'll have other ideas, and I'll keep developing them.
Yeah, no matter what, it's great to have that mindset of this is never the last idea I'll ever have, nor the best idea. And
Right,
having that
exactly.
mindset really helps you be able to not not have too married of a mindset to it. We'll do our final question with a very timely question by Danielle about talking about the current federal administration and what changes we
Oh,
expect to see in Maker education, especially with its connection to career technical ed and workforce development programs. Do you see any changes that you expect will happen with the Maker movement because of our new administration?
well, I don't have any, you know, special information here. So I'm like everybody else here,
Don't talk
hoping
to Biden every
that
day?
no, 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 no. Um, uh, but we obviously had a lot of support from the Obama administration, and something approaching dead silence during the subsequent in thing. But I um I hope the Biden administration, they're starting to think about things like you know how do we make things in America so that we're not
Mhm.
dependent on a global supply chain that breaks and we're lost. I mean, if just look at it's so fascinating over the last year. I mean, we're all in the same situation, but I don't know whether it's fires in California or the frozen tundra in Texas. The world is breaking, and we need people who can step in and try to fix it
Yeah,
and make it better. And I think I, I I hope Biden doesn't just expect that to come from
right. We
multinational
need to
companies.
we need to bring
I
in the
think it
next
has to come
generation
from a
of people.
grassroots level, and it's kind of the other part of Daniel's question is that I'm really fascinated by. We just started a program that's in its second week called Make Learning Labs, and it's for 17 to 24-year-old students, and try to build like a boot camp, but it's like 4 weeks to acquire the basic maker skills,
Mhm.
dive into a couple areas, and then really take the time to develop a project. And the kind of thing you would bring to a Maker Faire, thing
Yeah.
that's, but also something maybe that's solving a problem that you can actually talk to other people about and see if you can come up with solutions for them. So I'm hopeful that the Biden administration does that, but I'm particularly interested. We just, 20 years ago in January, we started the No Child Left Behind thing, which has been this regimen of testing, standardized testing. And I did a piece recently, and I called it the multiple choice future with an interview with Pam Moran. And
Mhm.
we're either going to kind of stick with multiple choice standardized testing, or we're going to give kids really a multiple choice future, where there's multiple options for them, multiple ways to learn,
Mhm.
and it isn't just about getting to college and passing you to the next level of education. It's like you should be able at any level of education to do real stuff today. There's problems in your community. And so I think that's what Project Invent, is about as well, is that, it's again, back to that artist idea. It's not something you're going to do in the future. It's something you're going to do now. John Dewey said that, it's not about preparing you for the future. It's about connecting you to what you can do right now.
Exactly. And educators have such a big role in that, in being
Absolutely.
able to raise that army
Well,
of being able to do good and do it
honestly, this regimen of No Child Left Behind has devalued the role of teachers.
now.
And
Mhm.
if you just take assessment as that point, and I won't go off too much on a hobby horse, but, you know, used to, if you're in a workplace, you get a review, performance review from your supervisor or whoever your boss is. They don't give you a test and say, this demonstrates that you understood how to do your job.
Right.
And I think the same way is that, we should rely on teachers to know, what motivates students, what they're learning, what they need to, focus on, and how to improve. And again, the idea of coaching is to give people feedback that's really meaningful. The whole testing framework doesn't give anybody really valuable feedback. You don't benefit from taking the test. It's just a scorecard that doesn't, in aggregate tell some story, but we have to figure out. That's what I've always thought was powerful about making, is you got that feedback. You're trying to light a circuit, right? And you put the wires together, boom, it lights, and you did it. And if it doesn't, you go, oh, what did I do wrong? And you try to solve your own problem.
Exactly.
Right? You don't ask the teacher, ideally, did I do the right thing?
Yeah, but teachers can create that environment. And that's such a good transition for us to speak a little bit more about Project Invent as well, because so much of this event we hosted today was being able to kick off this exciting moment when we're building this giant community of teachers who are going to be disrupting their classrooms and moving it away from that test-taking model and into that making model. So I'm going to share a little bit about Project Invent and our focus on getting students building solutions to community problems and using all of these making tactics that we talked about today to be able to build impact in their communities. So students have gone out throughout the past 3 years that we've been running this program and able to bring it to 50 schools already across 14 states. We've been seeing so many different inventions that have been making impact in their own communities, whether that's a adaptive video game controller for kids with cerebral palsy or concussion prevention helmets for football players on their high school football teams. Students are looking around them, seeing problems, and using making as a way to make an impact and learning in a very different way than that typical test-taking model. And in the past 3 years, we've been able to grow to 50 schools. And this next year, we're actually recruiting a cohort of 100 schools to be able to run Project Invent in their schools. So we're excited to finally hit those triple digits and get some of you as teachers involved in that community. So far, we've really focused on building that community of disruptive educators who really love being part of our program and being able to bring design and making into their classroom, exactly the type of infrastructure and environment that can empower this next generation of students who are able to create change and are able to recommend to their other teachers as well to continue that movement and continue bringing more classrooms into focusing on making rather than the typical things we see with No Child Left Behind or the focus on standardized test taking. So logistically, this is what our timeline kind of looks like. Right now, we actually this month just opened fellowship applications, and this is our kickoff event to start drumming up interest and getting the teachers who think like us and are excited about making like us to be part of our program and apply for our fellowship. Then we host a 1-week summer training in July, all virtually and using a lot of really great collaborative tools online to be able to teach Invention online. So if that's something you're curious about, how do you facilitate making Invention online? That's a really great piece of the fellowship that you're a part of. And then you'll be running a team at your own high school of Project Invent students who identify a problem in their community and build a technology solution. So they're going from identifying a problem they're passionate about in October to pitching to investors and tech executives in Silicon Valley in April and May. So we're very excited to be opening up our next cohort. There's only one chance a year to apply for the fellowship. And right now applications are open until May 21st. You can go to projectinvent.org/fellowship in order to find out more information. And this is going to be a huge opportunity to be able to jump in very explicitly into the maker movement and bring it into schools everywhere. So thank you again for everyone who was able to join us today, and a big virtual round of applause for Dale for being able to share this conversation with us, because I feel like we were able to unpack so many ideas and inspirations about why it's so important for kids to make and continue to give those opportunities to as many students as possible. So if you would like to stick around and you have any questions, feel free to drop them in the chat. But otherwise, we'll be wrapping up for today, and you can join us at our future events. We're going to be having a few different lunch and learns over the next few months, where we're teaching microbit or different tools that your kids can use to be able to bring making into their own at-home classrooms or hybrid classrooms if you're back in person. And able to start building those skills for yourself and learn more about what Project Invent would look like. So thank you again for joining, everyone.
Yeah.